to Senate House. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Emma Bridges and I'm based here at the Institute of Classical Studies. This is the first event I've been involved in since working here, so it's really nice to see such a good turnout, so welcome. The format for the evening is that we've got 4 speakers. They're each going to talk for probably about 10 or 15 minutes each. I will introduce them in turn as their turn comes along, and then we'll have time for questions where all of the speakers will be available to answer questions as a panel. Excuse me. We'll probably aim to finish by around 7:30, and then you're invited to join us all for a glass of wine in the Macmillan Hall, which is just across the way. But do be careful because there seem to be lots of pots of paint for the installation that's happening out there, so try not to understand it anyway over. If you are on Twitter and you want to tweet about the event, we're quite happy for you to tweet during the event. The hashtag ICS Monsters, or if you want to tweet about it tomorrow, that would be great too. So I guess without further ado, I should introduce our first speaker, who is David Wengrow. He's a professor of comparative archaeology just up the road at UCL's Institute of Archaeology, and he does archaeological fieldwork in Africa and the Middle East. His most recent book was The Origins of Monsters, Image and Cognition in the First Age of Mechanical Reproduction, and that was published by Princeton University Press. Tonight he's going to ask, what is a monster and do we really need them?
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I know what a monster is, but I don't think we need them. And I'll try and explain why by way of opening this discussion, because I think that the overall title is something like, why do we need monsters? I'm not sure that we do. And I wanted to start with an image which conveys 2 kind of obvious things about the life of monsters, or images of these kind of impossible composite figures today. One of which is that they're all over the place. I mean, we just stuff our children's heads full of this kind of thing from the minute they pop out into the world. They're just drowning in images of anatomically impossible figments of our imagination. I don't think this was sort of typical of human beings for most of our species' existence. I think images in general probably were much rarer and unusual things, and seeing one would have been a more restricted kind of experience. That's one point. The other point may be, and of course you could choose anything. My son just happens to like Morris Sendak, but you could choose American superheroes, whatever you fancy. The other point about it is that perhaps because they're all over the place, we tend to assume that making them up and creating a monster which is very catchy and successful, and that people will remember or pay attention to, is somehow an easy thing for people to do, and a very spontaneous thing. Maybe the sort of thing that human minds have been up to since we first evolved as a species. I want to suggest, ridiculously in the 8 minutes remaining to me, that both of these very large assumptions are wrong. Or at least you could make the opposite kind of case more convincing. And if we stick with modern examples for a moment, I mean, one thing that's quite striking, so this is an image from the 1933 film adaptation of Alice in Wonderland. I believe inside that mock turtle is Cary Grant, before things really took off for him. And then, of course, there's a slightly camp-looking Griffin. And, I mean, even a sort of fairly arbitrary example like that is remarkable in one sense, because that particular sort of composite figure, the Griffin or Griffin, with its particular combination of bits of birds and bits of lion, has been around in one form or another, probably for about 6,000 years. Now, if it's easy to make up monsters, and it's the sort of thing people do very easily and spontaneously, why on earth do we have examples of this extraordinary kind of conservatism, where the same figment of somebody's imagination just hangs around for about 6,000 years? And 6,000 years takes us right back to things like the origins of the first cities, which is a point that I'll come back to. So I wanted to draw attention right from the start to this kind of conservatism of composite figures, and the fact that some of them have these extraordinarily long life histories. I think Leonardo da Vinci must have been aware, from a practical point of view, of some of these issues, because there is actually an entry in his notebooks called something like how to make an imaginary creature look natural. I'm always reminded of Michael Caine's advice about acting. Just act natural. And Da Vinci had the same sort of idea about monsters, and he says, well, if you want to create one that people are going to remember, you can't just stick together anything you like, you know. You can't have a sort of a dog with a bear up its arse and, you know, stick them on its shoulder. I mean, nobody's going to care about that. What you have to do, you can take a bit of everything if you want, but you must arrange them in an anatomically correct pattern. The eyes have to be where you would expect them to be. The tail must be where it has to be. The legs have to be where they should be for walking. So actually he says that in a way, in order for a monster to be sort of culturally popular and successful, it has to be a very common sense sort of thing. And this goes along quite nicely, I think, with some much more recent theories in fields like evolutionary psychology, which generally say that if you want to have a concept of the supernatural that people are going to stick with and adhere to, it also has to include a fair bit of intuitive common sense. And I think ancient monster makers must also have been well aware of these kind of principles of image making and experimented them all the way back to ancient Egypt and figures like Taweret, who I think you can't see here, but she's a bit crocodile on her back, and a bit hippo and a bit lion. Or an example much more recent from West Africa, this figure of a West African chief or faun. Now, of course, at one level, this figure is impossible. I mean, it's obviously impossible and ridiculous, but at another level, it makes perfect sense. I mean, all right, it's a human with a fish head, but it is a head, and the head's in the right place, and the eyes are in the right place. And the legs are there for walking, and the fins are roughly where you might expect them if they were going to propel that body. In other words, you can imagine, and your brains may be imagining quite involuntarily actually, how this thing potentially could move. And that seems to be somehow key to all of this. But here's the thing. When I started looking into this subject about 7 or 8 years ago, the thing that immediately struck me was that there just aren't very many of these kind of composite figures in human art. And human art, in the sense of depiction, goes back in one sense or another, at least to the Upper Paleolithic period, so we're talking, 30, 40,000 years back. I'm sure it goes back a lot further than that, to the beginnings of our species. But the first time we really get lots of evidence for human image making is in things like the famous painted and etched caves of the Dordogne in France or of northern Spain. And I'm sure some of you have been to them or looked at images of them. And the first thing that strikes you is that whoever made them actually sticks very closely to reality in terms of what's depicted. Almost everything you can make out there is something you could in fact see in the world of a hunter-gatherer around you 40, 30, 20,000 years ago. Now, of course, there are some exceptions. The problem is people love to publish the exceptions. Every coffee table book on prehistoric art is going to have this thing in it. Now, this is the so-called Lion Man or Löwenmensch from a cave site in Germany called Hohenstein-Stadel, and it's very famous as being possibly the earliest figural sculpture of anything in human art. And it's always published as a monster, part lion, part man. But there's only one of it. There's nothing else like it. And in fact, the more I look at it, I just think, bear, maybe? Just a bear. If you say this to people who work on prehistoric art, you know, they'll have a fit. They'll say, oh, of course, it's a lion man. They say, well, maybe. I mean, you know, possibly. But even if it is, there's nothing else like it. Actually, there is now a Lion Man 2, which they found in the same cave nearby. But if you Google it, I mean, it's really just a sort of stick of ivory, and you can't really make out anything of it, but they call it a Lion Man. And then the other image that you'll always see in every book on prehistoric art is this one, which is often referred to as the Sorcerer. And as depicted here, this is from a cave in France, called Les Trois Frères Cave. As depicted here, and this is the image that you'll always see reproduced, it's quite convincing as a monster or a composite. You can see there are antlers and maybe an owl's face or something like that, and you know, heaven knows what else going on there. The problem is, this is of course not a prehistoric image. This is a drawing that was done in about 1910 by, I think this man, the Abbé Henri Breuil, who was the great doyen of prehistoric rock art studies in the early 20th century. And if you read his account of how he drew these images, and remember this is before electric or battery-powered torches or electric lighting, so he's down there with a gas lantern, and apparently rather like to drink as well. And he comes out with all these fabulous images. And this is what tends to get reproduced. If you look, you can't actually go and look at this image in the original anymore because it's one of those caves that's been closed down for conservation. But if you look at a recent picture, I mean, you could say that it allows for other interpretations. There it is. So beware, I would say, of widely reproduced images of monsters in prehistoric art. In fact, I think the first time, just shut me up if I go ahead. But I think the first time in human history that you really get very widely reproduced images of these kind of imaginary composite beings is actually surprisingly recent. I mean, if we've been around as a species for something like 100,000 years, maybe twice that much, it's only really about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, at the time of the first cities and big centralized societies, that you start to get monsters all over the place. And often the kind of images that survive are on funny sorts of objects like this. The real one of this is tiny. This is a tiny little stone, seal stone, which was used in the manner that the diagram there shows you, for actually putting a kind of bureaucratic mark on a container, a commodity container. So you'd wrap a piece of clay around the mouth of a jar full of wine or whatever, and then you'd roll this cylinder with its negative impression over the clay, and you'd end up with a positive kind of image. And a great number of these things carry images of these kind of composite figures. And they are, as far as I'm aware, the first mechanically reproduced images in the history of art. Weirdly, they're hardly ever mentioned in books on the history of mechanical image making, which tend to start with print and the printing press. But really these kind of seals are precisely that. Repeat, 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 monster, monster, monster. Or you get images of that sort on objects like this. Very highly prestigious, very restricted kind of objects. This is the so-called palette of King Nama, one of the earliest Egyptian pharaohs, and the less well-known side, which is to your left, carries images of these strange mixed bodies, part lion but with a kind of serpent's neck, or two such necks intertwined. The very strange thing about this image is that it also occurs about 1,000 miles to the east in Mesopotamia at the same time on these funny little commodity marking devices. So already at the birth of the monstrous image, you've got this phenomenon of kind of conservatism, or people not just making up. I mean, the Egyptians could have made up any monster they liked. They're figments of somebody's imagination. But instead, they borrow an image from a neighboring civilization. How peculiar. And you can replicate this kind of pattern again and again and again. So my argument from the evidence would be that we don't need, or at least we haven't used, monsters in the sense of images, composite images. I've no idea what was going on in people's heads, or the kind of costumes they may have dressed up in, or the kind of drugs they were taking. But as durable images, I think these kind of composite figures really don't go back that far. And I think their origin is something to do with the birth of cities, bureaucracy, and large-scale administration. Now, I don't have any time to explain why I think this, but if you want to find out, why I think that's the case, that it's all in there. If you want another take on the whole issue, and you read French, I very much recommend this exhibition catalogue from the Quai Parley, which was an exhibition that took place around the time my book came out, and I was lucky enough to be able to go and see it with Philippe Descola and Anne-Christine Taylor, who convened it. And it's called La Fabrique des Images, the making of images. And it's got a very different take on this whole thing, and I recommend it, and I'll stop.
David, if I can't say that led to me to think about whether monsters are anatomically correct before, so thank you for that. Bear that in mind in the future. If you've got questions, hold them for now, and we can talk more at the end. I'm going to introduce straight away our next speaker, who is Dr. Johnson Lodel. Johnson's a lecturer at the University of Kent. He specialises in Roman literature, but he's interested in the ancient world in general, and especially in wonders and legends. His most recent publications were on weather vanes and magnetic levitation, I believe. He also wrote a book called Monsters and Monstrosity in Augustan Poetry, and he's now writing another one about ugliness in ancient Rome. Dunstan tonight is going to talk to us about real monsters in ancient Rome. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Now, this image on the screen is from a wall painting somewhere in the middle of the period I'm going to talk about. Most of the evidence I will discuss comes from the 1st century BC, 1st century AD. So, a time when the Roman Empire is prospering, and in the roughly the early part of that, it's an arena of competition between major statesmen, generals, becoming wealthy, becoming powerful, and competing against one another. And then in the later period of that, it's the empire, and we have an emperor who is the leading statesman, the leading rich and powerful person, and yet still there is some sense of competition and projecting power. So when I talk about real monsters in ancient Rome, and I'm going to mention a number of different types of monstrous or strange creature or being that a person might actually see, I'm going to be talking about them as tokens not only of personal things to enjoy personally, but also things to display and things to put out into the world as part of a person's identity, or indeed of a civic identity. But I'll first just begin with this painting. I think many of you are probably already thinking, that's not a real monster. It is a sea monster, and it's spouting water. You can see little lines at the rock on which the Princess Andromeda is chained. And Perseus is coming with his flying sandals to defeat the monster and rescue her. And we might think the artist painting this image didn't think that was a real monster. That looks like a really good example of something that you can cook up from whatever creative elements of your mind you have to make it really interesting and curious and surprising. The name of this monster was in Greek Kertos, and then the Romans inherited that word, Kertos, which means monster, big sea monster, but also it means whale. In fact, our word, technical word for a whale, is a cetacean, and that cetus comes from Kertos, which is that word for a monster. So that might make slightly more sense if we look at a particular historic event which happened in 58 BC. This is when Marcus Scaurus came back from Judea, where he'd been involved in managing the slightly problematic province, and he was very rich, and he was appointed to the office of aedile. Now, an aedile has several duties, one of which is to lay on shows for the public, and people hired to that role often took it as an example, an opportunity to make an example of themselves and to get good credit among the general populace and among other influential people. It was a sort of investment in future elections so they could get higher up the ladder. In 58 BC, Marcus Scaurus basically smashed all known records, and he made a series of spectacles which were remembered and talked about for years to come. And in fact, we have written accounts of them which give that impression. He managed to display 5 crocodiles and a hippopotamus at Rome, things which had never been seen before, at least not by the townspeople who were accustomed to going to shows. There were 150 leopards. There was a temporary theatre, which you couldn't have a permanent one at that time, which was 3 stories tall. It could hold thousands of people. And he also showed a skeleton of a huge sea monster. And not just any sea monster, but it was, as everybody was told, that sea monster. It was the Cetus from the story. It was the one that Perseus killed, brought from Judea. And if I just show you the detail of that compared to a picture of a whale's skeleton, this is a fin whale, the largest whale that's commonly found in the Mediterranean. You can see how a set of bones like that might map onto people's expectations from the mythological monster. That might well, it would be difficult to argue against the presentation of such a skeleton and such bones as those of the famous sea monster. And that's a good starting point for us looking at Roman interactions or engagements with actual monsters. And I'm going to use that term quite loosely, but I'll tell you what I mean at every point, and hopefully you'll see how they all come together. So sometimes they were seen as supernatural beings from myth, but you could also have monstrous or exotic creatures which were just unfamiliar. They didn't match any old stories, but they were effectively aliens because it was sufficiently exotic that they didn't seem familiar at all. The first emperor, Augustus, is an important figure in the history of monsters at Rome. There is another striking occasion when a series of strange creatures arrived at Rome. And I don't have a date for this, but it was sometime, maybe a few decades after this, when King Porus of India sent a number of exotic gifts to Augustus. We have a written account of this, which describes several such gifts. They included a snake that was 10 cubits long, that's about 4.5 meters, several other large snakes, a giant tortoise, and a partridge that was bigger than a vulture. I'll show you, oops, hang on. This is an example of a Roman public interest in exotic creatures, an elephant, which looks rather like some bagpipes, and a slightly better crocodile. The second coin there is a coin of the person we know as Augustus. And it says, Aegypto capta, Egyptian, Egypt captured, after the capture of Egypt. And many of these creatures came from Egypt, of course. Okay, so here is a python, commonly found in India, well, often found in India, shall I say. A giant tortoise, which used to be common on a number of Indian Ocean islands, and is still found in 1 or 2 of them. And a partridge, and if you think of a giant, what did I say? Yes, a partridge. If you think of a large partridge, the Great Indian Bustard, I think, is a reasonable candidate. If you look at the colouring of it, it's a bird that stands at about 1 metre tall. So it could well be one of those, which at the time were very common in the plains. Okay, so these are creatures which we don't think of as particularly monstrous, but if you had never seen a bird which we call Great Indian Bustard, you might well think it's a type of partridge which is totally unknown. And that, of course, is a process that happens all the time. Something new arrives, becomes more familiar over time. That moment of shock, I think, is worth hanging on to, because it keeps happening. And it's a consequence of having a large empire with strange things pouring in from every corner. Next, I'm going to look at some less exotic creatures, but still creatures who are engaged with in an unfamiliar way. So, how monstrous a real animal is can be a matter of perspective. This is part of a poem from Marshall, and I'll come back to it. But you can see that there's a list of creatures that people seem to be carrying around with them as pets. A monkey, a mongoose, a puppy, not surprising, a magpie, a nightingale. They're charming and they make pretty noises, but also a snake. And it could be that this is a partial list, but it's certainly an interesting one, and it contradicts our expectations because we have so little information at this time. As I said, I'll come back to the rest of this poem later. But snippets like this we can piece together and get a bigger picture. The orator Cicero, a very well-known name, mentions in one of his letters that he ran into a man called Vedius Pollio when he was in charge of part of Turkey. And this happened in 50 BC. And this Vedius was travelling with a huge retinue. It included a number of wild donkeys and a baboon in a chariot. Cicero despised Vedius, and this probably didn't help because baboons are not terribly cute creatures. They had enormous canines, and in fact they were known in antiquity as dogheads. So I think for Cicero, this was an example of his poor taste in creatures. And at this point it's worth mentioning one of the major sources for the information I collected here, the elder Pliny, who deserves a special introduction. He died at near Pompeii during the eruption in AD 79. But more importantly, he wrote the world's first encyclopedia. And some of the time, he was packing up information from other writers in order to share what he thought was interesting or important. Other times, he was interested in condemning the indulgences and extravagance of people with more money than sense, and it was a moralizing text at times. Now, both of these motives led him to record things about Roman relationships with strange creatures. And so, just as one example of that, rich Romans in the 1st century BC had many lavish things built on their grounds, and one of them was they would often have fish ponds, and in particular eel ponds, because eels, mureinae, which can also mean lampreys, were gourmet food. And Licinius Crassus, one of the richest men in Rome, had a beloved pet eel, which wore earrings, and would apparently come to him when called and feed from his hand. And Augustus's niece Antonia apparently also had a pet eagle with tools. But the rarer the creature, the greater the impact. And so now I'll give a couple of examples of Roman nobles who used apparently supernatural creatures, really singular seeming ones, to build their reputation. There's a strange story, I'm not totally sure what to think of it, but Sulla, a very important Roman general who marched on Rome, tried to interview a satyr, half man, half goat, that was found sleeping in a pleasant sacred spot and brought to him. He couldn't get any sense out of it, we're told, because all it could do was make a noise that was half neigh and half bleat. He was totally shocked and he sent it away. That was the end of the story for him, but others had more successful interactions. One of them was Sulla's enemy, Sertorius. He made his base in Spain, and while engaging in civil wars with other Romans. And he had a pure white deer, which amazed people that saw it. And to the Iberian Celts, among whom he was based, the deer was a divine animal. So it's very likely that that was a significant opportunity, very good PR. It was put about that this was an animal sacred to the hunting goddess Diana, or the Iberian equivalent, and that this deer advised him on what to do, which is very encouraging if you're looking for a general to fall behind, because the one with divine favour, of course, is more likely to be successful. And a generation after that, during equally chaotic times, Julius Caesar had a horse with split hooves that resembled human feet. For Suetonius, there's good old details like that. There was allegedly a prophecy that whoever tamed this horse would rule the world. And he must have been somewhat proud of this creature, because he actually had a statue of it made and installed in his forum outside the Temple of Venus Conitrix. A few generations later, Nero, one of history's bad emperors, unlike Augustus, would ride in a carriage drawn by a pair of hermaphrodite horses that came from Gaul. Pliny, by the way, is totally outraged by that, and finds it horrifying and a sign of Nero's terrible moral character. He didn't seem to mind the horse with toes, so it's interesting to see what divisions there are in these relationships with individual creatures. It could be because Nero was making everyone look at horse genitals. It could be because it seemed gratuitous. There was no prophecy or supernatural sign attached to such a deformity. But Pliny stepped in there and moralizes. Suetonius also tells us that Augustus, to go back to the first emperor, he got as much publicity from exotic beasts as those before him, Marcus Scaurus and many others. In fact, he made special arrangements to put exotic creatures on public display whenever there was space. A tiger in the theatre, a huge snake in the sacred assembly grounds committee, and a rhinoceros in the voting booths. In fact, as part of Augustus's funeral games for Julius Caesar, Rome saw another hippopotamus. Possibly the same one, I don't know. But that was considered a fit occasion for putting a hippopotamus in public view. Augustus was also known to keep a collection of strange bones and antique weapons at his villa Capri. Here's what Suetonius specifically says about those bones: because of the huge limbs of sea monsters and wild beasts, which they call the bones of giants. So Suetonius believes that they are monster bones, but he's doubtful that they're giant bones. It was widely believed that heroes of the past were much bigger than modern men. They were shrinking over time. And in fact, that everyone's descendants would be even smaller. And several heroes were dug up and reburied with honours. Most of these hero bones were probably mammoth or dinosaur bones, and I recommend Adrienne Mayer's excellent book, The First Fossil Hunters, because there's a wealth of detail on this. If I can just go forward a bit. Here's a picture I took from the book, in which she shows that you can rearrange bones of a large creature like a mammoth into a more or less human-like form. And that explains why there are so many giant human bones in antiquity. So with bones too, there's a borderline between known and unknown forms. A geographer named Strabo saw an elephant's skull at the Cemetery of Diana in Campania, in Italy. And when he lived, which is 2.5 centuries later than when elephants first arrived in that part of the world, I suspect that things have changed. And maybe this elephant skull was dedicated because King Pyrrhus had invaded Italy and been in Campania. He wintered there at 280 BC. And if the skull of an elephant had been acquired, it was an exotic thing and suitable for offering in a temple. As I said, in Strebo's own day, an elephant was not that unusual a creature, and if you lived within reach of theatres in Rome where you could see wild animals displayed, you would know what elephants were, certainly. I'll just move on quickly to preserved monsters of other kinds. And we're going to talk about tritons as well as centaurs. There was a centaur that was pickled in honey, and we have two accounts of this. One was Pliny the Elder, and there's another later description written around the time of Hadrian, which goes into more detail. And we're told that the centaur was fierce in face, it was hairy in his arms, and it looked more or less like you'd expect, except smaller. And there are a couple of cases of tritons that were also preserved. This is what they look like in myth. Have a fish tail and a human upper portion. This is a very early, an archaic Greek image. This is a much later one. Sometimes they have a sort of skirt of fins or some other discrete marine matter. If we go on to Pausanias' description of actually seeing a preserved triton, he says, they have hair on their heads like frogs in ponds, not only in colour, but also that the hairs cannot be separated from one another. I'm not really sure what that means, but perhaps it looks like there are ridges, maybe like sort of slimy locks of hair, I'm not sure. He goes on with more detail: gills under the ears, a human nose, teeth of a beast, blue eyes, fingernails that resemble Muro's shell, and then the expected tail. It could be that this is an ingenious bit of taxidermy, and there are many 19th and 20th century examples of such creatures. They often involve monkey parts, and here are two examples. The Banff merman is still on display, and the lower one is an example of a Fiji mermaid. The first Fiji mermaid was P.T. Barnum's showpiece. It's debated whether any of the surviving ones are identical with that, but here's an example. It's currently kept in Brighton. And we have other accounts of tritons. There's one which was at a temple in Tanagra in Greece, and we're told that an expert on fishing had written a 24-volume book on matters regarding fishing. He'd gone to investigate, and he wasn't really sure what to think. The head had rotted off, but one of his companions cut a piece off the hide, burned it to see whether it smelled like a fish or a land creature. It stank. It was inconclusive. But the end of that story, as we're given it, is that man later died in a boating accident. And when his body was pulled out of the water, it disgorged a stinking liquid which smelled very much like the burned piece. So the moral of that story, it seems, is that the triton was real and that it was displeased and he was punished. So at least some people wanted to believe such stories were true. It's an excellent horror story. It reminds us of the dangers of such creatures. I'm just going to move on and show you the Martial poem again. I'll finish by filling in some gaps because I haven't talked about human monsters. But this is how the full poem goes. And you'll notice the list of creatures starts with a hare fox, probably a fennec, includes an Ethiopian. And then the conclusion of the poem is, if people like all these monstra, these monsters, why shouldn't a person love Babiritas with his blanda aura, his cute face? So Marshall is fond of Babiritas because he has a cute face, and others might think that's weird. We don't know who or what Babiritas was, but probably, I would suggest, as a person with Down syndrome or a related condition, which gave them a distinctive appearance in their face, and perhaps a very mild disposition. And we know that often wealthy Romans, for their spare time, liked to spend company with children or childlike people. And this might be an example of that. I'm going to finish by giving you another slightly enigmatic piece of source material. This is a reference in the Greek author Plutarch to something in Rome which he calls the monster market. He says there are people that like beautiful things, and then there are others who are more prying, and they have strange tastes. They're interested in things that they really shouldn't be interested in, and they go to the monster market. They can see people with no calves, with weasel arms, with 3 eyes, or with ostrich heads. We don't know what to make of this, but it seems that there was some aesthetic pleasure, even among human monsters, that related to this general interest in marvels, the unexpected. So we live in a very different world. We have a far wider range of imaginary monsters, and it's expanding all the time because of rapidly progressing technology. Perhaps we'll soon find out what it was like when monsters, both known and unknown, suddenly appeared for them.
Thank you very much, Dunstan. So next up is Dr. Liz Gloyn, who is a lecturer in classics at Royal Holloway. Liz's research interests in the ancient world cover Roman philosophy, Latin literature, and the history of the family. And her book, The Ethics of the Family in Seneca, was published earlier this year. She's currently working on another book which explores the way in which classical monsters are used in popular culture, and that's going to be what she's going to talk about tonight.
Thank you, Emma. So I'm sort of picking up a little bit from where David was talking about the conservatism of monsters and how these monsters carry on being and carry on existing. So I'm assuming that everybody in this room has at some stage watched a film involving the special effects of Ray Harryhausen. Nods, right. So the monsters that Harryhausen created have become really iconic, particularly to those of us of a certain era who grew up watching the films on wet Sunday afternoons, on bank holiday Mondays, very, very much part of our lives. And his visions of monsters, because they were the monsters, really have shaped the imagination of a generation of classicist filmmakers. Harryhausen's Hydra there is an image, and his Medusa, Harryhausen's Medusa, as far as I can tell, is the first who got snaky tail as well as snaky hair. And that's really become canonical for how we visualise Medusa. When we think about Medusa these days, she has the tail, of course she has the tail, and that's entirely down to Harryhausen as far as I can see. But the full range of Harryhausen's monstrous interests didn't just lie with the classical. He brought a whole range of amazing creatures to life, including dinosaurs, the mythical Eastern rock, aliens of various kinds, and a giant octopus. His Kraken, which for some would be the most evocative of all his monsters, is not in fact even a classical monster, despite the fact that it appears in Clash of the Titans, and you would think it was, especially since this is a retelling of the Perseus myth, and here is Andromeda tied to her rock, sans Perseus at this point. The Kraken is actually originally from Norse mythology. But the screenwriter felt, and I quote Harryhausen, that as a name for a sea monster, it was too good to miss. So, given that Harryhausen had a global range of monstrous traditions open to him, not to mention the possibilities offered by imagining the future through science fiction, as he did, why did he keep on coming back to classical monsters? What was it? That sort of is kind of the key question for my bigger question, which is why does anybody keep coming back to them in the modern world? What's given them that amazing longevity to survive into the 21st century? So that, for instance, those of you who have sat through the Lego Batman movie will have seen a Lego Medusa amongst the villains that the Joker attempts to recruit into his army. And indeed, if you feel inclined to go and feel the packaging at the Lego store, you can indeed purchase a tiny Lego Medusa of your very own. Why? There is, of course, the complicated issue of how one starts defining a monster to begin with. For example, connoisseurs of collectible Barbie dolls were at one stage able to purchase a pre-transformation Medusa, reminiscent more of the famous Mycenaean snake goddess statue than of the fearsome monster, yet she's clearly evoking all of those snaky expectations. She's got the armlets, she's got the curly hair, she's got sort of the switching skirt, a bit more like it's described on the packaging as a fishtail skirt, but you know, clearly snaky, arduous lines there. And sort of this example sort of shows a bit why it's not enough simply to list monsters when we're thinking about sort of the continued life of classical monsters. It's not simply enough to say Minotaur, Cyclops, Medusa, and so on. And why we need to think a little bit about how we can tell whether something actually is a monster, is a classical monster. Let's take the hermaphrodite. Now an understood medical phenomenon. In the Roman period, a hermaphrodite was considered a monstrum to be thrown into the sea at the first opportunity. The word monstrum, a monster comes from the Latin monstrum, which in turn comes from the verb moneo. A monster is a portent, a monster warns. A monster comes from the deepest spheres of society. I'm going to throw some theory at you, don't worry. These are sort of Jeffrey Cohen's monster theses, which sort of in monster theory terms are sort of the key things that we think about, where monsters are coming from. And the first one, very first one, is that culture tells us what shape a monster takes. What the culture defines the shape of the monster that it gives birth to. So what generates a monster can be the fear of the uncategorized, that doesn't fit into the neat definable box. It can be the unfamiliar, the ever-present other, both feared and desired. It can be the need for a policeman, something to mark the limits of the acceptable and the normal. All that said, what do we make of creatures like the Minotaur, the Harpy, the Siren, the Centaur, who spring from ancient Greek consciousness? What do the fears and concerns of ancient Greece have to say to the modern world of hanging around as we indeed are in 21st century London? Why do we care? If a monster comes into being because of the fears and concerns rooted deep within the culture that creates it, when does a Minotaur stop being truly monstrous and become a curious creature instead? Or to put it another way, when does the Hydra become a cuddly toy? Or for that matter, Cerberus become a cuddly toy? I think the answer is found in another feature of the monster, which is its endless flexibility and resilience. Think of the vampire forever returning from the grave in a fresh incarnation, sometimes with extra added sparkles. The monster can reshape itself to haunt the culture that's using it, not just the culture that created it. So there's this fine line between a classical monster being used because it's a necessary evil. You can't tell your Theseus story without there being a Minotaur in there somewhere. And the monster who is fearsome because it's allowed to become a reconstituted embodiment of ghastliness, not just a fascinating oddity from Myth 101. Yet that fascination is actually as important as fear. The monster is an object of desire as much as it is of revulsion. And for those of you familiar with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Frankenstein's deeply ambivalent relationship with his monster, you know, who is the monster in that story, sort of really brings up that idea of fascination and revulsion, the twin poles there. That's embedded in as far back as the text as that. Classical monsters draw us in at the same time as they repel us, just like we read these ancient myths wanting to encounter the beasts up close, but not too close. Film gives us the perfect opportunity to come even closer to the monsters, to see its slavering jaws, sometimes even in close-up, to shudder at its hybrid transgressions, all the while safe in the knowledge that it's only a cinema, the lights will soon go up and we can tread over the popcorn and go home. Video games go even further, letting us not only see the monster in close-up, but conquer it with our very own sword or from the comfort of our own sofa. So we've got two twin frissons here, of pleasure and of horror, rolled up into monsters created by the brains of over 2 millennia ago. So when we encounter a classical monster in popular culture, is it there to frighten us, or to fascinate us, or both? Now obviously that's going to depend a little on the nature of the place where we encounter the monster. Seeing a Harryhausen version is very different to reading about a monster or seeing one on a video game screen, or indeed in a film created by CGI rather than by Harryhausen's trademark dynamation technique, which of course did not see the light of day again properly until the advent of Wallace and Gromit. In fact, the dangers of being seduced by CGI is nicely illustrated by this wee chimera, which comes from the 2012 Wrath of the Titans, sequel of the remake of Clash of the Titans. They were really clearly going for it in the title decision phase here. Now, as you can see, those of you who of course regularly consult your Hesiod about your descriptions of monsters will see that they've taken Hesiod's description of this monster really quite to heart. Hesiod says it's got a lion's head at the front, a dragon's head at the back, and a goat's head somewhere in the middle. They've done their best, although the goat's head has sort of disappeared off somewhere, but we've definitely got 2 heads. It's got sort of shaggy goat spur, that'll do. And what they've done is they've created a monster which breathes petrol from one head and fire from the other to create fireballs. But the chimera has a whole rich mythic tradition of its own. Instead of using that, the film rips it straight out of that background and dumps it into the film's narrative as a sign that something is up. It sort of lands in a fishing village and incinerates bits before Perseus stabs it, and then stands pensively in front of a window. But compared to that, there's a whole YouTube video. If you go onto YouTube and look for this, there is a whole YouTube video from the production team basically going how frightening they wanted this monster to be and how much they thought about how its internal mechanism would work for the fireballs, and wasn't it cool? And you get none of that. You get 4.5 minutes from when this first crawls out of its chasm to when Perseus manages to get it to fireball itself. The word chimera isn't even mentioned in the script. It's just there as cannon fodder and as a sign that Perseus is soon going to have to cope with some fairly massive daddy issues. What seems to have happened here is that the CGI, rather than allowing the chimera to come to life, has actually frozen it. Every lovingly realised feather, every sort of carefully articulated claw and bristle of fur comes from this desire to somehow be ultra-faithful, hyper-realistic to the original in a way that isn't then committed to in the narrative. We're going to make the beast absolutely perfect, but we don't care where it fits into our storyline. What actually happens as a result is that the monster becomes pathetic. It becomes a fetish of the digital artist. It doesn't serve any narrative function. It becomes a victim of this very desire to show off the esoteric about the monsters of a long-dead culture. Look, we read our Hesiod. We gave him something authentic to kill in 4.5 minutes. And then once it's been displayed, freak-like, like the freaks Bunston was talking about earlier, it's killed, it's dispatched, the movie moves on, it's finished. I feel slightly guilty about switching slides at this point, but sorry, we're finished. Contrast this, for instance, with the monsters of the 2014 Hercules, which had Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in the title role, and I have to say I do rather enjoy Dwayne Johnson in most things because he has an awfully good time. The plot itself is pretty monster-free, focusing instead on the adventures of Hercules and a team of mercenaries who are hired by King Cotys of Thrace, supposedly to train up his army in self-defence, but it turns out he actually wants a fighting force to conquer all of Greece. Boo hiss. Cue the team attempting to work out whose sides they're on and whether they're going to be paid by the baddie or not. The monsters mainly occur in an opening sequence which tells the familiar tales of the Hydra, the Erinathean boar, the Nemean lion, but it turns out we're actually listening to a story that Hercules' nephew is telling to a bunch of pirates holding him captive. Hercules and crew turn up and save him in short order. And the rest of the film intermittently punctures the idea of monsters being real. For instance, there's a scene when Hercules returns with Hydra's heads in a bag, and they turn out to be soldiers in snake masks. No wonder men thought they were serpents, says the king who sent Hercules out on the mission to begin with. Yet after the end of the film, where Hercules performs sort of a prestigious feat of strength, which sort of is beyond all prestigious feats of strength he has hitherto performed, and sort of opens up the plot. Could he really be the son of Zeus? Cue dramatic lighting effects. The closing credits allow for the possibility that maybe those monsters we saw in that opening sequence might actually be real after all. And what we get is, instead of sort of the fully realised stuff, we get this kind of sort of draft, sketchy practice CGI. So everything is done in sort of this not quite fully mocked up CGI style. And instead of showing that the monsters didn't exist, instead it shows, rather than Hercules conquering them on his own, it shows the way that all of his team were involved in helping to bring them down. So it does retell the stories, but in a different sort of way, and the monsters are still very much there. So by never actually showing a real monster encounter, Hercules gives classical monsters the space to exist in that ambiguity between reality and story, and incidentally evolves the distancing effects of CGI, which some filmmakers are actually already starting to kick back against. For instance, in the hugely successful Mad Max Fury Road, the car chase scenes were done by stunts rather than technology. The only thing the CGI did was to enhance the landscapes and the colours. Being hyper-real is not actually always in a monster's best interests. So, coming back to the opening question of this talk, why do ancient monsters survive in the modern world? Well, I would argue that it does help to think of them a bit like Medusa's hair. All versions of Medusa, the Minotaur and so on, spring from the same place, but they're independent creatures in their own right. They're restricted by their roots. The snakes on Medusa's head can't just go crawling off wherever they fancy, but they do have some freedom in finding new ways of existing. Ancient monsters survive because they are supremely adaptable. Rather than becoming tied to the fears of the ancient Greeks and Romans which generated them, they found ways to come through the shadows of the modern world. Sometimes the fascination that they exert means that we look at them too closely, causing them to freeze in our fervour to get them right. They allow us to explore ideas of truth, fiction, and the boundary between our world and the supernatural, as in Hercules, or, like Rihanna, here as Medusa, they draw on deep contemporary social fears. In this case, acting as a figure of feared sexual desire, representing ambiguous feelings about women and their sexuality, which is part of GQ's stock in trade. So this was the sort of front cover for an anniversary of the Gentleman's Magazine. Do we call them those? Anyway. GQ, but I sort of want to finish with this one because there is this Medusa has a bite in her tail. Snake, whatever, wherever we are. However many snakes we have options for biting with. For Rihanna to be Medusa is not a neutral act. In May 2013, so sort of about 6 months or so before this was sort of published, her abusive relationship with singer Chris Brown finally broke up after what had been sort of a reconciliation earlier in the year. Definitely finally sort of ended at that point. As you will remember, the reason for Medusa's transformation in the first place was that she was raped by Poseidon. So for a woman whose identity as a victim of domestic violence had been widely publicised, debated and dissected in the celebrity gossip press, taking on the persona of Medusa offered a quietly pointed opportunity to comment upon what it was like to be defined and embodied and indeed monstered in those terms. Classical monsters never stay where you think you've put them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. Lots of Medusas to think about in that particular talk, particularly the leg on Medusa, which is my favourite. And this is creates a perfect segue to our next speaker, Valeria Vitali, who is based here as a research fellow at the Institute of Classical Studies. Valeria is community manager of the Palladius Commons project here. She worked particularly on the visual representation of ancient places and objects, and she's currently exploring the potential of 3D technologies, which is where tonight's talk comes from, as she's going to talk to us about making monsters.
Okay, good evening. Thank you for joining this experimental session on how to make a monster. So with my colleague at the Monster Center, we have decided it would be useful to discuss some aspects of monstrosity, to give you some information about the things that you could combine, slice, multiply, resize when making your own monster. So we have identified 3 axes of monstrosity that we'd like to discuss with you. And of course, we are perfectly aware that there are many more, as you have heard in the previous talks, and that they overlap and they are kind of intertwined, to be fair. But for the sake of this demonstration, let's pretend that they are artificially separated. So let's start with the first one, that is size and number. So we might be inclined to believe that things that are bigger are scarier. But that is not always, true and straightforward when we talk about monsters. So let's make an example. Let's look at a whale. Well, a whale is definitely big and can be dangerous, can be worrying, especially, if you are at sea and your captain is mad and all that thing. But we wouldn't say that a whale is a monster usually. Now, let's look at another example. If we look at a human holding a crab, we might say, oh, that's gross, or pretty, if you like. If we look at a picture of a crab holding a human, then we have definitely entered the realm of monstrosity. But that's not because the crab is big, but because the crab is a different size from what we were expecting. And you shouldn't assume that this mechanism only works in one direction when we talk about things that are bigger than we expect. And to make my point, I will borrow a very popular meme that you might have heard before. So I'm going to ask you, would you rather find a horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? And I have no idea who came up with this bizarre conundrum, but it helps me making 2 points actually. The first is that, as you have seen, even things that are smaller than expected can be monstrous just because they are unsettling, they are not what we were expecting. The other point is number. Because one small monster can even be cute, but if they grow in number, they become very scary again. And if you think about it, that is the basic plot of so many horror stories. But we could manipulate and we could think about numbers, even at a more granular level, at the level of the single creature. So a very classical example in every sense. A dog with 1 head, it's a good boy. A dog with 3 heads, we might be less inclined to take on, no offense. And again, this principle doesn't only work when we multiply things like limbs and other things. Sometimes, as they say, less is more. So, for example, 2 eyes, rather dull. 1 eye in the middle of your forehead, monster. 2 legs, unremarkable. Only 1 leg, monster again. And, okay, let's move on to our second axis of monstrosity, which is my favorite, arrangement of parts. Because to be honest, nothing says monster like, putting together pieces of different animals that do not belong. Like, if you remember, those children books where you could turn only part of a page. That is basically how chimeras were made and a lot of classical monsters were made. And funnily enough, this principle still works even when we move outside of the organic realm. So things that are made with parts of other things can become incredibly scary. Oh, you don't see that very well. Okay, it's okay. It's a toy made with scraps of other toys. It's really scary. But okay, what are the rules for mixing and matching these parts? Would anything work? Well, if it were up to me, what I would do would be I would take all the deadliest, the most dangerous characteristics of all creatures ever existed, like, I don't know, the fangs of the Siberian tiger, and the horn of the rhino, and the venom of the scorpion. I would put them together to make the most, terrifying nightmare ever. And I'm sure there are a lot of monsters that are created like that. But there are also less obvious choices, and let's say everything. And even looking at probably the most iconic classical monster, which is the chimera, we have already met. So the lion bit, we all get. Lion is scary. The dragon or snake bit, we also get. I mean, those are deadly. The tail snake, that's actually a really nice touch. The goat, on the other hand, it is somehow perplexing. Like, I mean, how are we going to make the goat scary? Also, where actually the goat seat? Does it look the same side of the lion, the opposite side? Do they share, I don't know. But you can see complexity in the illustrators as well. And now I can hear some of you saying, well, goats can be actually harmful, they can be aggressive. If we're using gladiatorial games, yeah, okay, I take the point about the goat. Maybe there was some goat underestimating going on my side. But what about the Wolpertinger? I hope my pronunciation is correct. So the Wolpertinger has the head of a rabbit, the body of a squirrel, and the wings of a pheasant. So what the Wolpertinger tells us is that you don't need to be dangerous to be a monster. And then we have a whole other category that is human hybrids, of course, and it is self-evident how they can be even more unsettling to us humans to look at. And now let's go quickly to our third axis of monstrosity, which is the quality of not being natural. And this is probably the one that needs a little bit more explanation. So let me call, in my help, the platypus. So the platypus is an egg-laying, duck-billed, beaver-tailed, otter-footed mammal, and it's even poisonous. So basically, the platypus is the closest thing we have in nature to a chimera. The platypus ticks all the boxes. It should totally be a monster. However, it's not. And it's not because it exists, because it is natural. And what the platypus tells us is that to be a monster, you have to be human-made. You have to be a product of the imagination. That's why platypus is not a monster. Dinosaurs are not monsters. They did exist at a certain point in time. And on the other hand, if you want at the other end of the spectrum, when we create something that does exist in nature, but we create it unnaturally, like, for example, we create another human being, either reviving a corpse or cloning, those are monsters too, because they are not natural. Or if you want, they'll not be created by God, but here we would abandon the classical realm. So this was our introduction to things that pertain monsters, and I hope that this does now make you eager to create your own monster that will probably be forgotten very soon, because we are going to actually start bears other animals next. But I think that as human beings, we should all have a go at one of our most exciting prerogatives, which is creating monsters. And the way we're going to do in our experiment today is to use a 3D tool, a 3D software that is Autodesk Mesh Mixer, and a bunch of other free resources. Everything that we're going to use here is free, so if you want to replicate this experiment at home. And we will be using some of the internal libraries of Mesh Mixer and some other elements that we have created, basically to combine animal and human parts, to resize them, to add more than there should be, and so on. And the way we're going to do this is that this time I'm going to do the modeling, but you're going to do the choices. So this is our menu for monsters. So you can choose one element from each of the 3 categories, and you can decide to be a little bit creative with that. For example, you can ask for something that has the body of a horse and the head of a goose and a horn. So basically, a unicorn. We 3D printed it. It's amazing, isn't it? Or you could ask for the body of a rabbit and the head of a gorilla and mouse ears. And you would have a bud-illa. There it is. Okay, cool. Ready? Also, please remember, this is live, which is basically, asking for trouble. So, if something goes wrong, just be patient. So, do you want to see the menu again?
Yes. Should we switch off some of the lights?
See, that's
a little dark.
So the first that shouts one wins.
Octopus!
Okay. I have to say, the octopus is a bit complicated. There is not much that you can do with it.
Oh, bunny! Lion.
Crocodile.
Okay, I got a bunny, a bunny body with what head?
Crocodile.
Hippo.
With a hippo head, good. I mean, I think it's a hippo. It's a weird shape. You tell me what you think it is. What extra?
Scorpion tail.
Wow, I like that. Okay, let's do that. Let's get rid of the unicorn. So, let's start. Putting everything nicely in the center. I'm just repositioning it. Okay. So, first thing we do is we cut his head. So, let's. Okay. And then we tell erase and fill. So we have, a nice building space. So what was the hippo? Yes. So I have interpreted that as a hippo. Do you think it's a hippo? Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't accept. I didn't accept my change. Okay, so. Bigger? Yeah. This big? Okay. Now, accept this. Let's cut its tail so we can put the scorpion. Bigger? Yeah. This big? Okay, maybe a little bit up. Okay. Oh, that's pretty cool, guys. Okay. Another one? Wings. Oh, on this one? Why not wings? Do you want sort of angel wings?
No, scary wings.
Scary wings, okay. We only have butterfly and bird. I mean, yeah, bird were, I mean, I was saying angel, but I mean. So, my wings are, okay. The wings we have to actually. Wait, what are they? Smaller. You happy? Cool. Shall we make another one?
Yes.
Okay. Menu. So next starter. Crocodile. I like that guy. Hat? Human hat. Nice. What else? A cobra. Okay, a cobra where? On the head. So the human head has a cobra on the forehead. I kind of like Let's go again. This is all scary. That wasn't planned, but it's actually planned. Okay, so do you want a human head or the torso? So we have a sort of centaurus but with crocodile head. Okay, there is some version.
This is actually what crocodiles look like in some old bestiaries. They drew them with human heads. So, like.
Okay, this is looking really weird. And we also have to attach the cobra. There it is. or bigger? Bigger. Like this. Huge. Okay. Like this. Okay. Now this is really disturbing, I have to say. Okay, do we have time to do one more, or we should stop? Yeah, no, maybe it's better if we stop. Thank you for playing along, but I mean, there is actually a serious center that is not the Monster Center, it's the 3D Center at SAS, and we are experimenting with 3D imaging and modeling, real-time engines, virtual reality, 3D printing. And if you're interested, and if you have questions, if you have projects, just please, get in touch. We would be very happy to hear from you.